and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, today we have a very special guest. We're joined by Pavan Verma. He's an author, politician, and of course, the former IFS officer. But today, Pavan, I'm welcoming you in your first capacity, that of an author, and congratulations on your 25th book. In fact, I have it with me. I've just finished reading it. The Great Hindu Civilization, Achievement, Neglect, Bias, and the Way Forward. It is really a book much needed for the times that we live in, Pavan. And I must say, you've done a extremely good job of, bringing up a lot of facts that need to be brought out. And also, I think you've ruffled a whole lot of very well-established feathers, I must say. So you're going to have both the right and the secularists gunning for you. But I think some truths need to be told, and you've told them very well in your own inimitable style.
Thank you.
And I want to begin with your first chapter, Hindu Civilization, Myth or Reality, really. And that's when you actually bring out the fact, is it an anachronism? The fact that Hindu civilization is perhaps the oldest one, and the one that is a continuous, it's not a relic of the past, but something that is a continuous momentum. But yet there are people who are, we feel that we don't acknowledge it. It's not been given the kind of limelight it should be given, the introspection that's not been highlighted. You've taken on historians like Romila Thapar and Amartya Sen, and the reason as to why they failed to bring it out. I'll let you tell us about this.
I think that Hindu civilization ranks among the oldest civilizations in the world. And it definitely has all the contours and substance of a civilization. It is a civilization marked by great antiquity, by continuity, as you said, by peaks of refinement, by assimilation, by diversity. And so we need to take that fact on board. But there are people who wish to downplay the objective acceptance of the fact of a Hindu civilization. There are many arguments that are put forward, and some of them are well intentioned, I must say. And I will come to that just now. One of the arguments is that there is no such word as Hindu, so how can there be a civilization attached to it? Well, I counter that quite strongly. Megasthenes in the 4th century BCE had used the word Hindu, and the Arabs, the Persians, the Chinese, they have referred to a collective set of people living in a certain defined geographical area who were evolving in the same civilizational crucible. So it's very clear that the Hindus, whether they chose to self-consciously name themselves as such, were identified as a verifiable entity. Then the question comes, was it a civilization or not? And there are people who believe that going beyond the medieval period to the ancient past is a matter of summary and some surmise and conjecture. And that basically the whole history of India, as Dr. Sanjay Subramaniam says, is about the crossroads of civilization rather than a civilization itself of successive empires succeeding each other. Again, is a theory I counter with facts and reasoning. Then the argument comes up that if it is a civilization, why should you call it only Hindu? Amartya Sen posits the argument, for instance, that it could be called a Buddhist civilization because for over a millennium, it was more Buddhist than Hindu, but which I believe is not the correct interpretation of history. Buddhism, a great religion in its own right, was essentially an offshoot of Hinduism. And in that capacity, the two religions coexisted, but the essential foundational ethos was Hindu spirituality and metaphysics. And that is why there is such a commonality and overlap between Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. And there was never that sense of unsurpassable acrimony between Hinduism and Buddhism. In fact, I've given examples after example how Hindu kings patronized both Hindu deities and Buddhist uh, places of religious importance. So there was never that sense of animosity between the religions. There could have been a few skirmishes between the more extreme followers of each faith, but essentially they coexisted, and Buddhism was a byproduct of Hinduism, which became a religion in its own right, but the Hindu ethos was the dominant one. Then people say there is no such word as Hindu. Wendy Doniger says, can I dare to call it in the singular? And she describes it as Hinduism as a cross between a hedgehog and a tortoise. Now, this kind of argument uh, is essentially a reflection of such authors are being unable to understand the diversity that Hinduism consciously nurtures without losing sight of its unitary narrative. And so I counter that aspect of it. You see, it's a strange logic by which those who are more accustomed to the certitudes of Abrahamic faiths are unable to understand the sheer efflorescence of diversity that Hinduism allows within its ranks. After all, Hinduism has no one god, no one prescribed text, no one only pope, no only one mandatory ritual. It has three foundational texts, it has six systems of Hindu philosophy, it allows for a great deal of uh, uh, ideological rebellion within its ranks, like the Charvak school. And all of this is part of Hinduism. So to say that it can't be seen as a unitary force because of its diversity is, I think, a very perverse logic. Then there are those who say that there is no question of a civilization, and I'm talking here of the Marxist historians who say everything should be seen from the prism of class and economic factors alone. But many historians, and I name them, including some very sensible historians who are not right wing historians, uh, they say that culture, civilization, thought, metaphysics, religion, philosophy, these are equally valid concepts. And while economic concepts have to be taken on board, that cannot be the only prism to judge the evolution of people. Then there are people who say, who question the antiquity of this civilization, and I make a very strong argument in my book about the fact that today the latest scientific data and research, largely focused along about the river Saraswati, predate this civilization by at least a millennia, if not more. Uh, and therefore it becomes, it ranks among the oldest, most ancient civilizations of the world. So you have to take it on board. Now, one of why, what is the reason, Priya, that people wish, who otherwise are well intentioned, wish to devalue this civilization? And the reason for that, as I see it, is many of them, left of center, are afraid that any acceptance of the greatness of Hindu civilization, not without its blemishes, but the overall greatness of Hindu civilization, will fuel into the glorification of Hindu Sabhyata and Sanskriti, civilization and culture in the current time, where the ultra right seems to be in its own way hijacking the entire narrative of Hinduism.
That
Well,
is the
these
bit
are
I
two.
really wanted to talk to you about, because that is also very interesting. Yeah, and you've taken on well-established names, and you've pointed out this hesitancy on their part. Yeah.
Yes, because frankly, uh, Amartya Sen will argue, and by the way, he's a well known Sanskrit scholar himself. Uh, he will try to downplay the antiquity of Hindu civilization borne out by Sanskrit scientific data today, he will question its continuity and its holistic nature as a civilization with great achievements in a variety of fields: science, philosophy, spirituality, music, dance, arts, political science, medicine, you name it. Because he feels that all of this will feed into the Hindutva narrative today, which is, I believe, mixing arguments. If you have a problem with the ultra Hindu right, Hindutva narrative today, you deal with it separately. But you don't deal with it by devaluing what have been the legitimate inheritance and legacy of your civilization. So it is the mixing of arguments that I critique.
And this is something you said has been also going on since the days of Nehru. In fact, you begin by the fact that he maybe the appeasement of the Muslim community that began post independence has led to this line of thought. It's even reached our textbooks. So it is a sign of worry that in doing so and trying to come to a certain line, we are also ignoring so much of our own past at our own
You see,
expense.
for Jawaharlal Nehru, I have great respect. He was the first Prime Minister of India, and but for his contribution, perhaps India's emergence as a republic, but for his guiding hand, was even by its in the Republic of India, supporters abroad thought to be questionable. I think he played a very important role. His modern, scientific, progressive, secular outlook helped to mold the values of the Republic in its formative and uh, fledgling state. But Jawaharlal Nehru had, in my view, one of his aspects was that he considered the past to be an unwarranted imposition in the headlong search towards a modernity largely fashioned in Western terms.
Well said.
He was a
That's true.
product of Harrow and Cambridge. He was a very honest man. In his autobiography, he himself says that sometimes I wonder if I'm a stranger to my own country because his whole conditioning and upbringing was such that he imbibed some of the colonial critique, and he was conscious of it, and he analyzes it himself of
Pawan, sorry to
India's
interrupt you.
past.
What I found most fascinating and something that is so obvious, it didn't strike me earlier. I don't think it struck a lot of people earlier. Is that Tryst with Destiny speech you rightly point out was made in English. He's at the time the most important speech when we're throwing off a colonial yoke. You speak in a language that is understood by the British and not by most of India. That is amazing, and that's
Actually,
something that hadn't
no,
struck
but
me earlier.
you see, I write about this in my book, The Great Indian Middle Class, also. But these are the inevitable legacies of colonial rule. Because colonization, its main purpose is the colonization of the mind, not only of physical subjugation. And it takes newly found independent countries some time to to sort of uh, dilute that particular influence. So Panditji considered the ancient past, as he himself described it, as the dead wood of the past. He equated most of that past with obscurantism, superstition, prejudice, and somehow a hindrance to a well-intentioned goal of modernity. And modernity also, as I said, largely in Western categories. Uh, and so, as a result of that, much of the reclaiming of our ancient past in the formative years after 1947 was put on the back burner. And I think that it was a loss. It was a loss because, Priya, the audacity of thought that marked Hindu civilization in the realm of philosophy, in metaphysics, the six systems of Hindu philosophy, it's a remarkable celebration. They are not talking about God. They are talking about what could be the ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of the cosmos. It was a it was a triumph of ideation. If you take philosophy, if you take spirituality, if you take metaphysics, if you take the remarkable, intricate, delicate, complex notions of the four purusharths of life, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, if you see the four ashrams of life, if you look at the remarkable theory of aesthetics developed before the birth of Christ in Bharat's Natya Shastra, uh, if you see the remarkable balance that was forged between the Nirgun, the one absolute without any categories, and its Sagun manifestation between Brahma and Ishwar. These are remarkable concepts. Then in the area of science, people paid lip service to it, but there was a great deal of work done in the field of grammatics. Panini's Ashtadhyayi, written in the 4th century BCE, was still remains one of the most complete lexicons on grammar. And Patanjali's commentary on it, the Mahabhashya, Bhartrihari's commentary on it, uh, these are texts that we should know about. Don't you think so? This is a great heritage in political science. Kautilya's Arthashastra. Do you know it was predated, as he himself acknowledges it in the Arthashastra, by 6 systems of established political philosophy? And his text also is the only extant text. In fact, it was almost lost. One copy was accidentally discovered in the 19th century from Kerala. So these are the great treasures of this, and I'm not saying that it's blemishless. I critique very strongly the inequities of the caste system that crept into the evolution of Hindu civilization. I critique the gender disparity and the general subjugation of women sanctioned by some texts within the larger Hindu civilization. These were deviations, great ills that crept into the evolution of Hinduism around the turn of the millennium in the 2nd century CE. So, but if you take a holistic view, if you balance
I'm going to
all of these
interrupt you.
criteria,
Your thought. Yeah, finish the thought, then we'll take a break. Sorry.
no. So therefore, to dismiss all of this as somehow the deadwood of the past, I believe is wrong. I believe it is not doing justice to a great treasure house of heritage which we should tap into.
We're going to take a break and come back and take a look at what is happening now. I mean, Pawan does talk about the things that we have ignored in the past, but how we can bring them up now. Maybe, talking about school curriculum, talking about even books like, I think, books on Savarkar that has come out, well researched, as Pawan also praises it in his book. Is this what is needed in our times? And also, we have someone like Dinanath Batra, who's talking. Uh, there is also a radical right wing that maybe is not doing the service it should be doing to the Hindus, to our past. So a quick break. You'll see. In fact, I'm told by Amazon that it is selling like hotcakes, and the publishers also told me that it's going in for the second print. So congratulations, Pawan, on yet another bestseller. But to come back to what we were discussing earlier, how- is there a why the timing of the book right now? First of all, what made you write it? Secondly, it's also come at a time where book on Savarkar has come out. I mean, there has been a lot of attempt to bring in some our past and relook at some of our textbooks, which has been done in a very balanced manner, and it's also been done in a slightly radical, I would say, lunatic manner, where you come up and say things like, plastic surgery was invented earlier, television was invented during Mahabharata times. This is not doing a service to our past, is it? Statements like this.
Well, as regards the Dinanath Batra phenomena, with great respect to him, you see, when one is not fully informed of the genuine, verifiable, legitimate, and objectively inferable achievements of our past. Then there is a mechanical glorification, which trivializes, in my view, the narrative of history. Brahmagut in the 5th century CE discovered the zero. The Pythagoras equation was discovered in India. But these need to be recognized. But to say that television existed in the past, or that modern cars flied, or that there were planes, or that there was, as you rightly said, plastic surgery, and so on and so forth, I believe trivializes the great inheritance that we need to objectively analyze and assimilate. So it's a consequence of cultural chauvinism based on cultural illiteracy, which we need to counter because there is enough to be proud of without trivializing it by such claims. At the same time, it is important to try and understand Hinduism as a continuity from the dawn of time through the Islamic conquest and the survival of Hinduism due to the remarkable Bhakti movement spanning 600 years with the most remarkable poetry in all the languages, the great democratization of Hinduism that took place as part of this process, a truly Priya, a truly remarkable. The Bhakti movement is a truly remarkable movement. Through the British conquest, colonial rule, we come to modern times. And here we are seeing the emergence in recent times of an ultra Hindu right, which in my view needs to be interrogated by the touchstones of our own civilization. If my civilization says with tremendous courage, Ekam Satya Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, wise people call it by different names. If my civilization had the courage to say, Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishvatah, let good thoughts flow from all directions. If my civilization had the moral fiber and the sense of self assuredness to say, Udara Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbukum. For the big hearted, the entire world is a family. Then I must question those who are interpreting Hinduism today through very narrow and exclusionistic prisms. Because, in my view, those who claim this leadership know very little about both our religion and the civilization. They are averse to dialogue and discussion. They are prone to violence. They are chauvinistic. Where women are concerned, and you would be interested, they are usually patriarchal. They are conservative. They are orthodox. And they are giving a very brittle interpretation to Hinduism. And so, this entire phenomena, in some senses, needs to be analyzed while taking on board many of the angsts, discontents that Hindus have genuinely faced or are facing. And we should be candid about those things. For instance, Priya, I cannot understand why in the pre-independence period Gandhiji supported the pan-Islamist Khilafat movement.
You're right about that, yes.
I cannot understand why in his wisdom, and I have the greatest respect for Gandhiji. There is a portrait behind me here which has only Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru. I cannot understand why he downplayed the heinous excesses of the Mopla riots. I cannot understand post independence why Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, again someone for whom I have great respect, advised Dr. Rajendra Prasad not to go for the inauguration of the newly renovated Somnath temple. I cannot understand why the Prime Minister, our first Prime Minister, amended the Hindu personal law without touching the other personal laws, including practices like triple talaq, when the directive principles of the Constitution speak of a uniform civil code applicable to all. I cannot understand why in the mid 1980s Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, whose instincts were right but he was badly advised, overruled the Shah Bano judgment. A
Badly
very
advised by a now
eminently,
BJP member, you're right, MJ Akbar.
yes, I know that he was, Wajahat Abubullah states in his autobiography, and he was in the Prime Minister's office, that MJ Akbar was one of those who advised Rajiv Gandhi very vociferously that this will harm the Congress party's interests vis-a-vis the support of the Muslim vote. And so an ordinance is brought about overruling the Supreme Court's eminently sensible judgment about giving maintenance to a widow to a woman who had been divorced through the repugnant triple talaq route.
We're totally
I
out of
cannot
time, so
understand.
I'm going to give you one last word because we're totally out of time. Is there a political motive? Because you're also a politician, and on the political side, you are really with the so-called secular brigade and not the right-wing hard right-liners. So, quick word: is there a political reason for writing this book on the eve of a
There is a
crucial UP
political
election?
reason. There is a political reason and a cultural reason. The political reason is that we are the legatees of a great civilization, Hindus, and we must live up to its highest ideals and prevent this great civilization and the great religion which has animated it from being distorted, hijacked, misinterpreted, because that would be doing great damage. And let us move towards a sane republic where Hinduism, in its inclusive generosity, allows all people to live in good faith. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina.
On that note, thank you so much, Pavan Verma, and for trying to rescue Hinduism from those angry Hanuman stickers that we see behind most cars. At least, you've given us as you said, this is a rescue mission, and it is a book that really is needed for the times that we live in. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.